TAMBO, who happened to be my father, but was also president of the African National Congress of South Africa until 1991. He said, "Let us in South Africa learn to stop being Bantu," which is a kind of derivative word for a black person, colours, Indians, and whites. Let us be what we are, Africans in Africa, united in our diversity. I will be speaking on educational diversity. I was asked to look at how, after decades of racial segregation and tensions, could South Africa overcome its tragic past and manage to regenerate a sense of national unity and common identity. What were the specific issues we had to tackle in the process, and what concrete approach have we taken to overcome these obstacles? If I may, I would like to briefly set the scene for the discussions of these issues. Education in South Africa has always been segregated along racial lines, and it went something like this. The darker the colour of your skin, the less education you got. As a nation then, since we have won our universal suffrage, we have travelled a road of twists and turns, and sometimes roadblocks, as we sought to define ourselves as a country and to find the best way in which to address the problem of diversity in our educational system. South Africa 15 years ago came out of a governmental system that was legislated to ensure that non-whites were treated as inferior in every way. Laws forbade black people to live in certain areas, work in certain industries, cohabit with different racial groups. Signs around our country would warn us, whites only, no blacks allowed. Naturally, of course, education didn't escape this discrimination. Apartheid was a unique form of social engineering that made sure that all non-whites received an inferior but much more expensive education than the white students from institutions that were not properly funded and were not equipped with any material resources. Under the apartheid system of government, apartheid meaning separation, by the way, black schools had a curriculum that was designed to keep black people out of the economic structure of the country and out of anything that would allow them to engage in governance either over themselves or their communities. Traditional structures of community were destroyed and family units were broken up due to policies of forced migrant labour. Excuse me. As H.F. Verwoerd, the architect of the Bantu Education Act of 1953, conceived it, and I quote him, "There is no place for the African in the European community above the level of a certain form of labour. It is therefore of no avail to them to receive training which has as its aim absorption into the European community." Against this backdrop then, the newly democratically elected government of the African National Congress had a formidable task. How to turn around the injustices of the past, the massive social, cultural divides, the educational inequalities, and create an educational system that was cohesive, inclusive of all racial groups, allowing them to study at the same level with a sense of respect for their diversity and the ability to see that there was indeed unity in that diversity. Integration was not something that would come easily, that much was quite clear. Part of the problem faced was the attitude problem, the sense of entitlement by certain racial groups to their position as superior in our society. And it was understood that the need to establish an equitable and effective education system was a top priority, and that it would require a transformation process that would necessitate the management of cultural diversity and organisational changes within our educational institutions. But education doesn't stand alone outside of society. How we learn and what we learn affects in the deepest possible way our interactions with each other and will determine whether we live in peace and harmony or tension and strife. And civil society has a huge role to play here. It must always be prepared to come to the party and show a willingness to engage in different forms of transformation. At work, at home, well, socially. Often apartheid had created in their lives, and those of their families, many of whom were murdered by the previous regime. It afforded those who had been the oppressors the chance to ask for forgiveness for what they had done. This helped to prepare the nation by allowing each group to see the others as brothers and fellow nationals, because under the apartheid system, no black person was actually a South African. They lived in different places, independent states, outside of the borders of South Africa, and they were called the Bantustans. And that's where the schooling of black children took place. Then, of course, there were events that started in 1995, when South Africa hosted the Rugby World Cup. Rugby was traditionally considered to be the sport of the oppressors. It was an Afrikaner sport. But the Rugby Cup brought a sense of nationhood and national pride to all South Africans. Now black children can be seen playing rugby with their white teammates, and sport has thus created an environment where the respect of skills, commitment, and teamwork are the benchmarks, not the colour of one's skin or what language one speaks. All South Africans who embraced the sport supported it and are extremely proud that we are still the world champions in the sport of rugby.